Welcome to Theorycraft, a live podcast where game developers and their players engage in conversation. We are back with another week, and I can't wait to discuss New World because we rarely have a new MMO launch to chew into, but we'll get into that right off the bat. How are you two doing?
Doing things. I went to a concert for the first time, second time, actually, technically.
I think you told us about your last one. Wasn't it like an 80s dance party or?
Yeah, that was, it was like a weird local band, but this was like a full-on go to the Hollywood Bowl.
Oh,
It was
nice.
Alanis Morissette and Garbage.
Oh my God. Really?
It was incredible. Yes, it was incredible. And you either had to have a negative COVID test within 2 days or a vaccination to get in. So it was like moderately safe. And they said you need to wear a mask, but once they got to their seats, everybody was just like, whatever.
Yeah, that's
Which
great.
kind of sucks, but.
So you felt safe. How was fucking Garbage, man? I was the just biggest Garbage fan back in the day. I mean, who wasn't? Shirley Manson was the 90s, but how was the show? I mean, I don't even know what their sets would be like these days.
It was Garbage doing the greatest hits, like she would. And this was Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill concert, so she was doing that album. But what was wild about it, like two things. One, Alanis had little transitional pieces of music that she would do between the songs that you recognize from the album, just like new stuff to keep it fresh. She also wrote a special song to her kids that she sang, which is very sweet. We're all crying.
Cute.
Two, they're in their 50s. The lead singer of Garbage was like, so I'm 55. and then we all felt old in the stadium. We're like, yep, all right, well, I'm also old. But if you think about it, yeah, they were popular 30 years ago, and so
let's not. But
let's not really think about it.
Yeah, I hear
but
you.
It was really nice. I did not feel safe for what it's worth. When I saw all the people, especially like it took me 4 hours to get from this chair that I'm presently sitting in to the chair that I sat in to watch the show, because like traffic was 2 hours to Hollywood, and then the Hollywood Bowl has no parking basically, so you park in a lot and then you take a shuttle to the Hollywood Bowl, and then getting in was like an hour's worth of people checking credentials and fighting and all that shit. And then eventually you could be ushered to your seat, which is also very far away because the structure of the Hollywood Bowl. But I mean, it was incredible. Once I actually got to my seat, I was able to relax. And the show was just so good. So no regrets.
Great. Yeah, I have a friend that he's a concert super fan, but he avidly avoids anything in LA because he just doesn't want to deal with that headache. Like you could have flown halfway to the East Coast in that period of time, which is insane.
You can drive to Vegas from here in 4 hours.
Yeah. But you have to. I mean, especially bands like that. I don't know, when I've fucking missed Rush. I've missed Soundgarden after they reunited, and then Chris Cornell took his life. And like, you just got to see these bands while you can. They're not going to be around forever. I saw 9 Inch Nails 2 years ago in Vegas with a friend, and I was so thankful to just do that at least once, because I just kind of like take that shit for granted, you know? I just assume there will be another tour. You can't.
Yeah, I saw 9 Inch Nails whenever I was 15, 16, something like that. Me and my friend, we like snuck out of the house and we drove from Texas to New Orleans. And we slept in her van, and I got home. Like I went to the 9 Inch Nails concert. It was incredible, of course. We got home, and she calls me because that was back in the day before text messaging, cell phones and whatnot. She calls me and she's like, "Oh my God, did you get in so much trouble?" And like, no, my mom didn't even notice I was gone. Like I had a really shitty childhood.
Wow. Speaking of shitty childhoods, Chris, how's things going over there?
Gosh, what's been going on? Just chilling out. On the weekend, went on a Duffy ride. That was fun. You know, like on Newport Harbor. Did you ever do that, Luca?
No, sorry. I thought you were about to say date, and I was so ready to just but you're like
no. Date on a Duffy. That'd be a good one. No, have you, Candace? Have you done Duffys before?
I don't know. The only Duffys I know are like Troy Duffy from Boondock Saints.
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
It's just like you go in these little boats around Newport Harbor, and so I did that with a group of friends, and that was a lot of fun. And then immediately, like a few days later, we just had this insane rainstorm with lightning and stuff.
Oh,
And I was like,
yeah.
It
that
fucking
timing was good.
hailed for just for 25 whole seconds, and then it stopped. It was a pretty wild storm that rolled from, and it was funny because it hit all my coworkers in Los Angeles first because it was coming from the north, and like 25 minutes later it hit me. I was like, I knew this was coming. It like shut off their power and everything. It was pretty wild.
Yeah, it looked incredible.
Yeah, people were like outside standing, looking at the sky. Like it was that kind of crazy. But it is California. We don't get really that much weather here, so yeah, that was entertaining. And been watching Squid Game. Only like 4 episodes in or so, so I'm going kind of slow with it, but pretty good. And then because we were talking about last week about it, and how Roblox has all these Squid Game games on there now that are popping off. So
Did you check them out? I mean,
a little bit.
like demented roadblocks, red light, green light, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean it's surprisingly pretty true to the show, and
Cool.
they're very easy games to make. You can make that thing in an hour.
Sure.
So it's really conducive to Roblox for sure.
The show is killer. It's so emotionally intense, though. Like, I want to finish it, but I feel like I'm needing to take breathers after these episodes now. Because
No, I know.
Oof.
That's why I'm kind of going kind of slow with it. It's like my ritual every night. I watch like 1 or 2 episodes. So
Yeah, that's dope. So I mentioned last week that I've been getting up super early for the last while. That's like finally starting to fade because my gamer
Really?
hours are kind of taking over again. But while it still held and while I was just getting into New World, which I finally started playing, I had a couple days in a row where I was like literally waking up at the crack of dawn, to work the land and then wince at the high taxes that the barons of Monarch Bluffs had set overnight as I like bring my haul back to town and store it. And I was finding it really meditative. And then I was like, how is this game subtly just kind of propagandizing me towards like enjoying serfdom, Like I'm seriously waking up while it's still fucking dark outside to go chop virtual trees until I can't walk and then get back to town and bitch about taxes. I was like, apparently this is like my dream virtual experience. So well set up for the future. But yeah, I think that's mostly what's new with me. Once it hit, I kind of canceled the rest of my weekend plans. My friend that I had some with, she heard from her brother about what the deal with this new game out was. And she was just like, do you need to like not hang out? When's the next time I'm going to see you? I'm like, yeah, it's going to be a while. And I just went ham. It's been really fun. I guess we can kind of roll into games news just talking about it. Queues have been less and less of an issue, but it's clearly still super duper popular. They just released a new 1.01 patch today that seems like it fixes some of the kind of more stubborn experience interfering bugs that are there off the bat. It's like a very tame, responsible 1.01 patch. We don't need to talk about every MMO patch that ever drops, obviously, but it's like, I don't know what Amazon's cadence as a game developer is yet. I don't know how much to trust them. I don't know what their communication's like. And this might just be because I wasn't participating super actively during all the betas. But so now that as like an invested player, I feel like I'm really watching them like a hawk to see, they make good on their word.
I haven't noticed this, but have there been like, developers on Twitter or Reddit talking to players? I don't even follow it.
Yeah,
really.
I haven't seen it. I hang out on that subreddit like crazy, and I haven't seen it. They have some official forums where I guess some screenshots from that end up filtering up to Reddit. I just let Reddit kind of tell me what's going on, but their Twitter account.
I have a question though.
Yeah.
To answer your question with a question.
Okay.
You said, I don't know what Amazon's release cadence is. And my question to you is, do you think that Amazon knows what Amazon's release cadence is?
That's
and
a great
that's
question.
that's not pejorative. It's not like, oh, fuck, slam, burn, whatever. It's just that I don't even think like WoW
Reality.
knew what its release you have to understand like what your tools are capable of and what your team is capable of, and like the launching of your game is going to like, is it a success? Is it not a success? Can we staff up? Do we need to staff up? Do we need to train people up? Like, I don't think a game really knows what its release cadence is for a couple of years. Like PoE didn't come into its own, so like, it wasn't a sick burn, but it was just more of like a They probably have aspirations and they have schedules because their producers are good and they're good game developers. But the reality of things is also like, bet they don't know that like people are just gonna fucking leave the company after they ship.
Yeah. I mean, that all may be true, yet I realize that I come in with some expectations as someone who's played MMOs in the past. So I guess we'll find out where the intersection is. Really, what I've just been watching for so far is their first official thing was like, we're going to allow for server transfers in the next 2 weeks so that everybody can find their friends, get off of crowded servers, get from junky servers onto ones they wanted to be on. And they said within 2 weeks, and it's a really important thing to consider because, well, I'm already split, basically. Some of my friends are on one server versus another. And already, and I'm sure this has played out on pretty much everybody's server, there's been like some or another faction or population-related catastrophe. On ours, it was that there may be some balanced servers out there, but I imagine it's kind of like Horde Alliance split writ like at hyper speed. But on ours, the Covenant faction, which is basically spearheaded by this one streamer, has taken pretty much everything. There was another killer guild of a ton of people that had joined the server and wanted to play on Syndicate. Then when they realized there was actual competition there, after acquiring a bunch of territory, they all re-rolled off the server and therefore left all the towns and everything inaccessible for anybody to manage and just claimed by a dead guild that wasn't there anymore. And with one, and like everybody's super demoralized and the Covenant are taking over everything and Syndicate chat is just people. Like the drama and this sort of feeling of a small server is really refreshing, but it does make me sort of wonder, like, how are these dynamics going to play out over months and years of the game if people are whining this hard kind of day one? And what will the flow of things look like once transfers are enabled? You can't make any decisions right now on whether to re-roll and play with a friend because on a more balanced server, for example, because you don't know how things will shake out after transfers open. And I'm curious to see if they sort of hit their literal first kind of post-launch projection of server transfers will happen at this time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because I mean, usually what can happen with that is everyone moves to like the cool server or whatever.
Yep.
And then everyone does that, and then it becomes lopsided or. Then you get what, in WoW they would call them like the backwater servers where like they're ghost towns and no one played on there and where everyone transferred from, So it'll be interesting to see what they do there. Yeah. Letting people transfer, I think, is a good move though.
Yeah. I will be interested. I don't know that they're going to solve it if Blizzard hasn't managed to solve some of these issues.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Some part of me thinks that maybe there's like a countervailing force of streamers wanting content that decide to move with a ton of people over to a server that's more hotly contested, because then you can have an entire arc of like, we're joining this underdog faction over on this server and we're going to bring it to glory. You know what I mean? Because just being in the lead the entire time might get a bit boring too. I mean, I have to imagine playing on the team that literally controls everything is kind of like...
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of lame at the same.
That's why
same
doing
way, right?
world PvP in that sort of way is one of the hardest things you could do. Which is interesting to me because both New World and Ashes of Creation are, that's part of the core experience is this faction versus faction world PvP, right?
Yeah, it's really compelling. I just don't know where it's going to go. Candace, I saw you playing a little bit right after the podcast last week. Have you gotten to put any time into it?
Not really. I only got to level 9 or 10 or something like that, and mostly because I got to where I wanted to go to my first settlement. I knew what that entailed, and I was like, well, I'm gonna fill up my bags first. And so I spent a long time just killing boars and cooking their meat and picking up herbs and shit.
You did the first bag fill and checked out before the several hundred bag fills to come.
Basically.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, what about the influencers? Are the influencers all sort of still neck deep in it, or?
I haven't even had the bandwidth to watch other people playing it on Twitch because I've been playing it myself.
Right.
So the only streamer I'm aware of recently is this one named Sequisha that's on our server, which is on US East. And like, again, I didn't realize how much I was missing this semi-permanent smaller server experience where you see the same names in chat every night and you run by the same people out in the open world until I got it with this game. I really didn't realize how much that had drained away from WoW in the last several years. The chat is salty and it's lively. It's just great background noise, even if you are just doing kind of solo PvE. I can only imagine it's even more fun for the folks who are like really invested in it. Like I would love to just I've been enjoying hearing people's stories of their own server drama and stuff they've been going through on theirs.
So can you slash fart in New World?
Oh,
Oh boy.
I'm not sure. On the topic of emotes, they did fix one with this patch, which is a good segue into our next emote piece of news. But the Pirate Ahoy emote, in which you raise your leg up and Captain Morgan it on top of a barrel of rum, was missing the barrel until today. So you just air posed. I don't know. You air posed, but it looked fucking amazing, and it was a perfect post PvP kill pose to just like raise your knee.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we each got like one ahoy in on some PKs last night before the barrel came back, so those memories will live forever. Yeah, it looks like Blizzard removed a bunch more emotes, the sort of puritanical scourging of retail WoW, of anything remotely suggestive of anything else keeps going. Again, this is one of those things where I feel like the content machine has probably covered it fairly well. Do you have any opinion on it?
I mean, I'll be the voice. I'll be the voice of the game director if you want, which is like
Only if you want to.
if I want to put my big wig hat on and grab my cigar. Would you, if you were making a game today, would you include all of that? Like, would you let people / fart on each other? Or would you have a goblin emote something like, and then he asked me to go up on him? Probably you wouldn't in a modern day MMO. Maybe you would if it was part of your personality. And so, like, I understand the desire to say, well, we've already decided, like, we've already turned the ship around, right? We've already decided that we are not going to have, like, potentially offensive comedy in our game anymore, like lowbrow comedy. So now it's just a matter of pruning all of it, ripping the Band-Aid off, and then going to more highbrow like humor. And then if I may take the hat off and say, but that's like also part of WoW's personality was that it had dick and fart jokes. Like that was then if I put my gamer hat on, the gamers are like, well, what's next? Are you gonna get rid of the memes and the puns? And it's like, maybe, I guess if like puns get canceled, but like it's too hard to like project into the future about what will be offensive. But so like in a nutshell, I think that what they're doing is the right thing, in as much as since they committed to being more inclusive and having an inclusive game, they need to remove the things that are less inclusive. And then I also wanted to say that like the game that you make has a profound statement on the behavior of the team as well. So if it's okay to put like a fart joke, or maybe not fart joke, maybe fart jokes are still okay. There's still like a whole line of poop quests where you like scrounge in the manure, which is still pretty funny to me, and I'm 36. But if you think that, like, if you're going to say that we're going to be more inclusive, then your team will be more inclusive. And yeah, so if you can put content in the game, like, imagine if you could put, if like World of Warcraft was more like Second Life, right? Where you could put, I don't even want to say it out loud, you could just put awful things in the game that are not consensual and that are very graphic and or very violent, and then people can just like play that game. Can you imagine what the team is like if that's acceptable at work? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like an extreme extrapolation, I think. But what I mean to say is, like, if you're going to foster a culture of like more mature and inclusive folks, then perhaps also the game should reflect those values.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really understand how. I think inclusive might be like kind of a stretch. I don't know. It was just like fart jokes, like slash fart or whatever. It seems more of just like they're kind of want to remove anything that's cringe that kind of makes them feel,
But if you're a role
guilty
player,
with
though,
toxicity or something like that, right?
if you're immersing yourself in this world, the case against fart jokes, not jokes,
yeah.
the fart emote is if you are really immersing yourself as a role player in this game, and somebody comes up and like just / farts on you, and you're imagining what that's like in real life. Like, can you imagine someone just walking up, putting their ass on you, and then farting on you in real life? Like, probably not.
I mean, I wouldn't like getting
That's never happened to
stabbed
you?
by a satyr either, but I mean, if we're talking
It has
about feeling
happened with
fully immersed.
several animals. No humans have ever done that to me, thank God.
Mm.
Yeah, I have this flashback because I went to a Catholic high school, and this one guy walked up to the brother, and it was on a religious studies class, and was talking to him, and then just ripped one right with his like butt facing him or whatever, and I don't know.
Well,
I just instantly got that. So that was
so
an IRL slash fart there.
it's just funny to me because now we're processing your trauma, and then
Yeah.
maybe we don't need to let people
Yeah.
process this trauma in the virtual world that they go to escape the real life locker
Yeah,
room
yeah.
where their brother comes up and farts on them.
Yeah.
But anyways, I just kind of feel like I agree with you. It's just like if you're making an MMO today, would you really add these kind of dumb emotes, right? Like probably not. I can just imagine whoever's adding them on the original WoW team was adding them, just kind of thought about anyone that would be funny or interesting and just was laughing while doing them, right? I just think it's just kind of it's getting attention just because of what's all that's going on, and it kind of seems like a reaction to, oh well, a bunch people got harassed on the team. Well, we'll remove these emotes, right? And people are like, well, how is that going to address any of that sort of thing, right? And
Sure.
obviously it's not, but that's kind of like why it just feels so arbitrary. I mean, probably what I would have done is like, oh, release the next expansion, remove all the cringy emotes, add a few new ones with cool like VO, and then there you go, right? It gets lost in a sea of changes. Whereas now it just catches headlines and makes people just kind of facepalm a bit. But
It will and it won't make changes. If I may also use an example, like a real life example, um, a there was a man on my team, and I won't say which team it was, that he would at his desk he would have either very close to nude women in photos, or just straight up nude women who are only holding on to their girly bits with their hands in what I would consider is like, porn when you see it, pornographic poses.
Mm-hmm.
They're they're very artistic, but they were also, again, porn is like what you imagine. And also he had like anime girls with their under boobs coming out, figurines, and he had anime boob
yeah, I think I know
mouse
who you're talking about.
pads.
I think we all know who you're talking about at this point, or we know someone like it.
And well, but here's the thing though, our game had boobies. Like there were several monsters in the game and pieces of art that go on the walls, and like there are bare-breasted women in the game. And so his defense was, if there are TDs in the game, then maybe it's
Really?
okay
Is that
for
what
me
he
to have
said?
TDs at my desk. Yeah, it was just
Oh,
like
well, that's such a weird.
right,
I
and
don't
that's what I
agree with
mean though
that.
about
Yeah, yeah.
it kind of reverberating into the culture of the team. And that's just like a small example. I personally don't mind the women's breasts, or I think that they're beautiful. I think that they can be artistic. I think that they can be pornographic as well, depending on the environment and what's being done to them. But the point is that like that kind of stuff does reverberate into the culture of the team. And whether or not it's something as divisive as whether or not women can show their breasts, or it's maybe someone is really uncomfortable with talking about farts or fart jokes, and that people are doing it at work all the time, and that makes somebody uncomfortable. And I personally don't do the digging through the poop quests, just because I don't like the idea that my character in WoW is digging through shit, and I
I never
don't
really
see
understood that
I've
one.
never
Those
seen
aren't
a
my favorite.
shower
Yeah.
anywhere in the game. No,
Yeah.
there's one. I saw the shower. There's like a seal in it in Dalaran. There's a shower in like the Enchanter's Guild or something in Dalaran, and I've stood in it before with my character just to feel like I've showered before.
The sweatiest of guilds. Like, I'm not sure. Well, you tell me if you agree or disagree, but Blizzard has always had some elements of puerile humor in their game going back when. And obviously, Blizzard, the company, has changed since then. Lots of new voices have joined, on the strength of earlier titles or to want to help shift the direction themselves. But I think apart from the fact that everything at Blizzard's on fire right now, and this is a no-win optics situation, some of the reason this stuff kind of stings is that it it feels tough to separate removing even like the most juvenile old emotes that people put in the game back in 2004 and would have flown then because culture is different from the contributions of those individuals and the greater things that some of those individuals might have represented for Blizzard fans. And so I'm not saying that like if you get rid of the fart emote, you're destroying Chris Metzen's legacy. But I think there is this sort of associative sense of like the more old stuff that gets yeeted out of the game, the further we sort of move from, I don't know, the elements of like old Blizzard that might have been worth saving. And obviously those two things should stand apart. But I do think that when people respond angrily to these kinds of changes, even though you're right, like in 2021, you would 100% not release an MMO with those sorts of fucking emotes in it. I don't really think they add anything. I probably wouldn't have missed it if they weren't there to begin with, you know? But I mean, what's your two's take on that? Am I like way off base or?
No, you're not. I hear you. It's very valid. What I'm hearing from you is WoW has changed its identity in a way, and here's how they're signaling that they're changing their identity. Because this is the identity I knew whenever I logged in 2004, and now suddenly it's changing. And I think what people are reacting to violently is that they have not expressed what their new identity is.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just so there's this huge question of like, well, what's next? What's on the chopping block next? And if WoW were to like publicly proclaim and then say like, here's our values, here's our identity, here's what we're going to replace, instead of just like removing the stuff, which is a great like first step, if they were to say like, well, here's what we think is funny now and here's some new jokes. But I think
that's
that
why
it's also
I think they should have coupled it with new introductions. Right?
and yes and no. Like if it's problematic, just get rid of it. It's really easy to get rid of it. It's harder to bring in voice actors, you know, act out new ones, et cetera, et cetera. But I think also, yeah, signaling that like, hey, we're not just removing from the game. We're going to add to the game, and we're hoping that you'll share this new identity that we have in this notion that we can create a virtual world that fosters inclusivity and is still funny and charming and, you know, lighthearted.
I think you fucking nailed it though. Like if all of these changes had come alongside some announcement from like a real visible person on the team, you know, Ian, anybody else in that kind of a leadership position saying like, look, these things might have flown a long time ago. They don't now. They're not really necessary to sort of what Warcraft means to all of us and where it's going. Like, you know, a person behind it as opposed to just people finding it in patch notes. Like, cowardly isn't the right word, but the fact that nobody is stepping up to say this is happening because of X, just in that void will rush in all sorts of speculation and people piling on about the lawsuit and, oh my God, the hypocrisy, like stop touching your coworkers and who cares about the emotes. And like, yeah, you're right. They could have just gotten ahead of this with a little more communication, I think. Like it's so not a big deal. And yet there's a right and wrong way to kind of address it.
The ire is understandable. I mean, if WoW is changing its identity, then all of its players are suddenly going to change their identity, right? Because if you're a WoW player, especially if you've been playing WoW since 2004, that's a part of your life. That's a part of who you are. Like, my name's Candace, and I make video games, and I'm also a Tauren warrior, and I'm also a Blood Elf priest, and I'm also a Volpera shaman, and that's what I am for 7 or 8 hours a week. And so that's part of who I am. And so if you're changing who you are as a game, then I'm also going to have to change who I am. And so there's a sense of loss of their own identity. And it was not something that many people asked for. And so they don't understand why it's happening. And so, like, I mean, it's not going to change the fact that part of their identity is now lost in a way, but it will at least move them in the same direction or something. And I have every faith, actually, that they do have like a plan for this eventually, that they'll talk to players about it. But it also seems like the right call to just like, if you can cut it, just cut it, fill in the holes later.
Yeah. And then I just want to get one more thing and then I think we'll move on. But it really occurs to me that what I've been feeling out of Blizzard and WoW in the last little while is like, where the fuck's Ian? Like I just feel like he's been laying so low, and 9.1.5 is full of great changes. But I think that in the wake of everything that's been shaken up at Blizzard in the last few months, there is kind of a vacuum. And I think people are really looking for somebody to step out and not just say like we're putting out the fires, but sort of just be like, we still have a vision. We understand. Like, I don't know.
Right.
There's a personality that is just like not been in the picture for Blizzard and WoW lately. And I have to admit, it's like making the idea of WoW as a day-to-day topic and conversation just float further and further to the back of my mind. Like becomes easy to forget that the game's around when they don't have people that you associate with it out there talking about it. And, you know,
Right.
honestly, Amazon might run into the same problems. I don't know who the game director of New World is. Their Twitter account seems to be manned by like a ton of really responsive, you know, service representatives. So do they need that? You know, Final Fantasy 14 is Yoshi P, and I feel like maybe every MMO does need its answer to, you know, that person who's kind of carrying the torch.
Totally. Especially if it's helpful to have like one centralized voice, especially someone with as much as authority as a game director. But I want to push back gently on the notion that it has to be the game director or that it's the game director's job to do that. I think that if you have enough people who are empowered with enough information and understand the pulse of the game and understand the vision of the game to act in place of the game director, I think it's okay. Like it's unfair, I think, to crucify Ian for not being around when really it's more of like we're crucifying him because he's the only voice that is meaningful or seems to have authority on things. But it would be nice if maybe there were a couple more, you know, like when Greg
Yeah.
Street left, there's no real replacement for the kind of communication that he had with players. And I think that's being felt.
That was maybe a bit too harsh. But I know, and also he probably has stepped back to let other voices have a stage to speak. And yet, I do just notice that the way I get news of World of Warcraft feels like it has to trickle up from like a handful of blue checkmark Twitter accounts that
Yeah,
you maybe know are developers on the game and seem to be the most sort of like vocal. It just seems like it's in a bit of disarray at the moment. I'm all for more people feeling empowered to speak. I mean, it'd be fucking great. You know, Chris actually engaging with the community as like a PvP developer was like one of my favorite things about him, is just asking people like, what were your favorite monk set bonuses and stuff? Because I felt like historically Blizzard just did not have a great rep with people feeling empowered to communicate, you know? So the more the merrier. But okay, wow. I'm running late. You want to talk about crafting? So, crafting systems at some point, kind of like role-playing elements and progression, just sort of made their way into every fucking game at some point or another. Because thinking back to games I played when I was younger, I don't know that there were elements of combining items together into this kind of like a loop and gaining experience off it. But it just does seem like one of those elements that you have to package in these days. And so if we want to like get a lens on where crafting is now, who does it best, maybe things we'd like to see from it. Like, what do you feel like is the catalyst for crafting being quite as widespread as it is now, like across many genres?
Yeah. What you have to ask yourself is like, what are you achieving by putting a crafting system in your game? And are those aligned with the values and the vision and the direction of the game? So in the games where they put in crafting just to be like a time sink, that's pretty obvious to players. Whenever it's either like too shallow or it's obviously just trying to like drain money from the economy, does things like break the gear, stuff like that. Like I think the first thing to ask is why crafting? Like, what does crafting actually achieve?
Well, you hit on
And
one,
like,
which is that
what
the
is the sweet
economic
spot?
purpose. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, like that crafting is so ubiquitous in games these days, and like why is it such a thing? You know, it just seems like crafting is just something humans really like to do, which makes sense just because it's been a huge part of the human story is crafting. Like, right? People have the last name Smith and even Craft or whatever, you know. So
Damn.
it just seems like just something core to us that we enjoy doing. And I think crafting really is something that people do day to day in their real lives, is like something they really don't do very much. And so it's kind of like a way for you to have that simulated experience
Mm.
and scratch that itch, you know? So I think it kind of comes from that. But in terms of games, like I think it tries to do a lot of different things, which is just give players autonomy of like how they want to build their character and adds to like the RPG aspect. And like you said, it is a bars to fill and things to do, and it makes like the world sort of relevant. It kind of just comes from really, if you're going to create a world, a virtual world or something, you're going to have to think about, okay, why do I care about that tree? Why do I care about that bush? Why do I care about fruit? Why do I care about all these things in the world? And so they always just naturally kind of end up with just like, oh well, you make an apple pie with the apples, you make armor with the leather and those sort of things. So more and more games these days are sort of more open world games, or games with an overworld, just because of technology and the ability to build these worlds, right? So I think that's kind of why you see more and more of it. It's kind of my thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. In a narrative game where you want to be able, or like a role playing game where you want to be able to connect with the world, or even in an exploration game, whenever you need reasons to go visit other parts of the world, the most intuitive way to do that is to say that you want the oranges from Florida, but you want the peaches from Georgia, and so then you have a reason to go to Georgia and you have a reason to go to Florida. Sorry for not Americans; these are Americans. Um, but
Yeah.
like,
Not
I
sorry
get
for the Florida shade is the only reason to go there is get oranges. But
and like Disney souvenirs. Who cares? Um, but yeah, it adds a layer of incentive to explore the world and makes the world relevant, like Chris was saying. I think crafting systems also sometimes try to achieve more other things that like either do or don't mesh well with the game. One is like scarcity of resources, like an economy. And I think
Mhm.
WoW used to be that way. There's a scarcity of resources, namely like Black Lotus, for example. Black Lotus was it was a herb that you had to pick, and every single flask needed flasks back in the day were like a extra 1,000 hit points, which was like pretty unheard of. You only had like 8 or 9,000 no, you only had like 3,000 hit points at launch, so it was like 25% more health. And flasks would also go away when you died, so you'd want to use a flask whenever you thought you were going to win. And
Mhm.
the way that they worked is that they were only up one place in the world, but there were like if I remember, there were like 48 spawn locations in the whole world, but they were spread across a bunch of zones. So like the right way to do it was to have an alt parked at every single spawn location and then pick it, and then you could ride the wave of picking it everywhere. So like scarcity is cool because that drives the economy, right? So like economical reasons. Then there's also autonomy, which is a good reason to put crafting in the game. If you wanted to give players a level of autonomy, you do that. It's tricky in an MMO without pairing it with the transactional like nature of crafting. Whereas like if you're just crafting for yourself, then what's the point in putting an MMO, right? So you have to like kind of pair those things. But you think of autonomy like in Diablo 3 as an example.
Mhm.
You can kill monsters and get gear, and that's a good way of getting the best gear in the game. There's also, though, if you don't want to kill those monsters or push the really high rifts, you can gather crafting materials and hope to get like a good roll basically on your crafted gear. But they kind of went away with that whenever they put the blood shard vendor in the game. But that's just like an example of using crafting as autonomy for the players. And a lot of MMOs will do the thing where you have high autonomy early in the game where because end game is usually like group content rating, but early game is not group content rating. It's primarily solo. And so you want to give people the autonomy to, explore the world, feel like the world is relevant, make some upgrades for themselves, not have to rely on finding 4 or 5 other people, do a dungeon, et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying to think of any other reasons that you put
I think
crafting in a game.
that's a good kind of fork to talk about with crafting too, especially with MMOs, is that, WoW and many MMOs towards endgame, they always feel like crafting just gets thrown to the wayside. And the reason why is like what you said, which is that usually the end game is built around wanting the player to raid or do bosses or all these other activities, and you need to have rewards for that. And so usually the rewards, the most sexiest rewards to give are like new items and things like that. And so that just takes away a lot of the oomph from crafting. And then crafting just feels just like, what's the point? And you just can't have both, right? And so, or it's very, it's a delicate balance between the two. And so That's also a huge challenge. And, a lot of concern with WoW at some point on Team 2 was, man, the world just doesn't feel relevant, right? And, well, why did the world feel relevant in Classic? Well, it felt relevant because you needed all these consumables.
Yep.
And so you needed to go run around fucking Ashara for an hour and a half trying to get Dream Foil, fighting over bots and, other people in the server or whatever. And that's why the world was relevant, right? So, I mean, the world is relevant because of crafting. And so crafting needs to be relevant somehow. So, yeah, they all feed into each other. So,
Yeah, it's really interesting because on the launch of Classic WoW, it feels like, and it felt this way kind of felt this way in EverQuest as well, where like, except in EverQuest, you could have as many trade skills as you want, but they were just very like time prohibitive to max all of them and kind of content prohibitive, where it's really hard to get Max Taylor because you had to do all this, like camp a rare spawn and do all this stuff, and you had to do a whole fucking ring war. Don't even ask me about the Coldane ring war because I will go off on it. What you're talking about though is really interesting because there is like to me there of two minds. There's the one like crafting is hyper relevant, but the crafting that was hyper relevant was gathering and consumable crafting, and that can always be relevant as long as you're consuming it. Um, the I think the problem falls apart whenever you tie crafting and economy to things that like well you can get similar items in the economy from that like for example, you couldn't get potions anywhere else. You can only craft the potions. So it makes sense that like that felt really relevant. But if you could get a chest piece that's almost as good or even better from a dungeon, then why would I need to craft it? So there's just not as much of a like supply. There's too much supply and not enough demand for crafted like gear because gear is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And so it's just really interesting to think like you wouldn't want a world where gear is consumable. Like some games kind of do it with like their tools being consumable, where you have to like remake a pickaxe every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But so I wonder if like the real answer here is, well, not like the real answer or whatever, but like
We've solved it.
Crafting is good whenever you need a lot of the stuff, but if you don't need a lot of the stuff, then it kind of becomes more of like a solo system. And what I was getting at with like EverQuest and WoW was that you kind of the power guilds, the power gamer guilds back in vanilla would have a notion of like I am the guild's primary blacksmith. And this is notated by the fact that whenever rare blacksmithing patterns drop, then I'm going to be guaranteed it because I'm of the type of person that is always online or I'm like the most loyal. And my guild doesn't feel like they will lose these things if they give it to me. You had the same thing with tailors. Like you had a bunch of tailors trying to make mooncloth, but the people that got like the rare mooncloth patterns, they were like, "I'm the actual guild tailor. The rest of you tailors are like sub tailors, not as good tailors.
You're
I'm the best
hobbyists. Yeah.
enchanter." I was the only person on my guild for like months who had minus threat to cloak. I think it was when I was on Proudmoore. Maybe I was on, I don't remember which server I was on, but like I would have people coming up to me day and night. Can I get an enchant? Can I get an enchant? And we forged alliances with entire guilds because I was so online all the time and I could always enchant their cloaks with like subtlety or whatever it was called. So that's really cool that you can have these roles, even though there can be multiple tailors in the guild if they're like generating, right? Because again, with the economy of supply and demand, like you need a lot of mooncloth for a lot of things, but you only need one real tailor to put it together, and that doesn't feel great. But yeah, that's just kind of.
how do you? You've been playing New World a bunch, Luca. What do you think about their crafting system? I've heard good things.
Well, I'm glad you asked. I've just been kind of casually crafting so far, but you're right. Everybody's really fawning over it, and I couldn't tell you exactly why, but I keep seeing this log line repeated about how crafting will be necessary for the highest gear at endgame. Maybe we can get someone up on stage to kind of explain it so I don't have to live Google it. But it seems like it's going to stay relevant into the end game for player power and not just consumables. I guess for longer than it maybe does in other MMOs. Like people are talking about it as if they've sort of cracked some kind of a code there. But given that we're only on like week 1.5, and I know there are people that have seen the end game already, but I'm a little suspicious about how that plays out. I think it's a bit deeper than WoW's, and people have been spoiled for They're looking for a new experience, and so I think it's getting a lot of high marks because it's an advancement there. There's a lot of fun interdependency between roles. There's just kind of like more variables to juggle, I think, when even considering crafting, because you have to consider what town you're sort of storing your stuff in. Various tiers of various crafting stations are built via town projects, and so the administration of that is one element. The political element there, actually holding the towns, is there. The taxation that gets levied on using these stations. And so I think it's just like there's like a richer ecosystem that crafting sits within. And I think there's more
What
of
do you
it.
what do you get when you do these guild raids against another guild or company or whatever? Do you get like crafted materials? Do you get like actual armor, or what do you get from that?
I haven't done any of them, so I'm not sure what the sort of just like,
That's
like
they're kind of equivalent to raiding.
the chest. Well, I don't know if it's like, I don't think it's not their equivalent to PvE rating, but there is like a 50v50 instance content that is like a war of throwing something into conflict.
Right. But there needs to be some reason to do that. And so I'm wondering if if the reason is the best gear in the game, well then, then crafting's kind of
Yeah, I don't know what it is,
ending.
and I have a feeling. I mean, I just have to check like who's watching right now, but yeah, I feel like Z Winter's in the audience probably with all the answers, so I don't want to speak out of turn. But as I understand it, the reason
we opened up the floor, by the way, if anyone wants to.
Cool. Night Stalker wants to come up, who probably also has some tidbits, but control territories for various advantages, like taxation, like I mentioned, is a big one. Just the feeling of being able to direct development of an area, collect more money. I don't think that winning a 50v50 war and like gaining control of Everfall or something gives you the sickest gear in the game or anything like that. We are getting a little bit kind of off topic because now we're just talking about New World systems, but Night Stalker, what's up?
Yeah, well, maybe it's the nature of this Discord, but what about single-player games with crafting or offline games in that regard?
I know,
old RPGs I've known since the early 2000s that had like limited resources where you could make mistakes with crafting, so you don't know how much you can sacrifice for some kind of progress.
Yeah, I was thinking about those too. I asked everybody beforehand if they had experience with just a couple of random other titles that really prominently feature crafting, like No Man's Sky. Minecraft famously has a ton of crafting. Stardew Valley, I know, has some. Candace, you're a huge Stardew player, aren't you?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on?
Yeah, the single player, it's just different because you lose the open economy. You still have like an economy of stuff. You still have like, I think the purpose of a crafting system in a single player game is like very high in the immersion stuff that Chris was talking about, and kind of like a little bit into like a time sink spiral of like, you want to gather enough stuff, especially if they put like any kind of gambling aspect into it. But especially a game like Stardew, that's it's driving you around the loop of the whole world, right? So like you want the berries to make the pies, or you want the cows to make the hide, or like whatever, or the milk so that you can make the pies or whatever. And I hate to use the word time sink because that implies that it's not joyful. Like you have a lot of joy in like organizing all of your stuff and planning ahead. It's more of like the strategy and the execution side of, and like the narrative side of decision making, and like providing you interesting decisions. Like, what am I going to do with all my wood? I can make tools, or I can make a pathway to go into my house, or like whatever. It's a lot of just like drivers of interesting decisions and drivers of like replayability, I guess, with a crafting system in a single player game to me.
Yeah, we feel free to just hang out up here as we continue to discuss more systems if you want to chip in. This is kind of flowing. But I actually wanted to, what you just talked about, engaging with the full loop of the game, and what Chris was mentioning earlier about the world feeling relevant is one of the things that I think New World does pretty well with crafting. I think it was even maybe Winter who was complaining about the amount of materials you need from earlier and older zones to keep advancing stuff. And I have a friend that already grinded to like endgame engineering in this game, and he said he needed some stupid amount of iron, like 4,000 or 40. It was just an inhuman amount of one resource, which is a bit mind-numbing and time-sinky, but I also like in a world where the content is supposed to be organic, like players running into other players, and there's no sharding or whatever, you do have people going back to other zones or every zone just to do their farming routes. Like I think that's kind of cool, and I think that crafting really can serve a huge purpose there, like Chris mentioned. More on the sort of like, okay, so the reasons for crafting sort of so far, the why crafting. Candace, you outlined, there's an economy, which gives things a purpose. There's the autonomy, and another one is role division, like your tailoring example was great. And I think Chris has been talking about just this sort of human, like it feels good kind of quality. I guess I wanted to ask if you all have like favorite crafting systems, and if so, like why they feel good for you, because I always feel like whenever there's crafting in a game, I'm looking for more of like a sort of skill-based crafting system. Like I do feel like crafting is generally really rote, like it's collecting and then queuing. And even in Final Fantasy XIV, where I know that crafting has to be engaged with actively, people just write macros to kind of run through it. And like I'm wondering if there are crafting systems that really set your world on fire. Like, and where are they?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't really have a good example. I think usually just like you said, like most of these crafting systems essentially are put all the ingredients and hit a button and you get the thing. And honestly, I think that's what mostly players want.
Okay.
There's always like this thought. I remember when they're working on a game at Blizzard, like there's this thought of like, well, make every crafting thing a mini game, like Cooking Mama or whatever, or
right.
There's like a little mini game every time you want to craft something, and you got to like connect the dots or whatever. It just gets kind of annoying, and I just don't. That experience has to be really fun, in order to be worth it. And it really just depends what the goal of the game is. If the goal of the game is to like kill raid bosses and that's what's fun about the game, then focus on that. I don't know. I've never really played a game where it had like a little mini game for the crafting that really kind of felt good. Breath of the Wild, I really liked the crafting there. It's kind of like a love-hate thing, where you kind of like throw ingredients in a pot and then it just comes out with something, and you have to like kind of like learn the recipes yourself. And it's kind of intuitive of like, oh well, if you put mushrooms and broth, it makes a mushroom soup or whatever. I kind of like that, and it was something a little unique. And I've been seeing that used around more and more. Like that game Grounded I was playing does something similar. So I don't know. Candice, do you have a good example of like a crafting game that just killed it?
I mean, it depends on what we're trying to grade it on, but like if we're talking about just like the joy of actually mashing the button, and like whether there's skillfulness there, the thing that is implicit that I will make explicit right now is that if you have a system where you can make a high quality item, like let's say you use the same ingredients and then sometimes you get a better output. Players generally don't like if that is 100% tied to chance. In a game like Final Fantasy XIV, you can add additional materials to increase the likelihood that you will create a high quality item, and to the point where you can almost guarantee it. Like some of them let you 100% guarantee it, some only let you 50% guarantee it, but you still feel like you had some control over it, and it softens the blow of whenever you don't get the high quality item. But if you don't want to make a system like that, then you need to replace that. Well, I stunk some more time and I put some more crafting materials into it to try to guarantee a high quality roll on it. And that's usually where the mini game comes in. Or like, we're going to do like a golf swing. If you remember playing golf swing emulators or whatever, there's like, it's a bar and it fills and it depletes, and you want to hit it at just the right sweet point to hit the ball at like the furthest distance or whatever. That's I mean when I say a golf swing. So the player feels like it's like if you guys played Undertale and you want to like you're doing the pacifist, whatever. So like you want to give the player the illusion Or at least you want to give the player the ownership over feeling like they had some sort of outcome over the success of the craft. And the very rudimentary version of that is like, did it craft or did it not craft, right? We're like, what was it? Was it Spiritfarer? You couldn't completely fail, I don't think. Actually, I think no, it was just the number of things you created in Spiritfarer, never mind. But like, imagine if you did a mini game and you fucked up the mini game and you just didn't make the item at all. It's just ash. Can't remember which game did that. But like you would try to cook something and it would just become coal or something. And you're like, oh, you fucked up the mini game.
Yeah, like the Dark Souls of cooking mini games. Like, you don't think that people would want those stakes to a degree, because obviously it'd be incredibly disappointing for a lot of people, but it would allow the emergence of like, that guy nails his cooking every time. Or if I've got these materials and I need a piece of armor made, like, I want him to do it because he's not going to fuck it up. Like, I'm not going to try to do it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But if you talk about a game like Cooking Mama, where like the joy of the game is in cooking the things, you do it intrinsically, right? You don't do it because you're going to get a breastplate or something. You don't do it because your friend is going to be really happy that you made them, an Ixia hide cloak or something like that. Like you play Cooking Mama, you're attracted to that game because you like the physical execution and movement, and like when the pot's boiling over, you blow into the mic and it literally like the froth dies down on the pot. Like you're playing it 100% for experientially to have the joy of cooking.
Yeah.
Whereas like in a game like WoW, you're not. You have other reasons that you're doing that, and likely you need to do it a lot.
For me, I
So
think like the most kind of ideal crafting system, at least in a cooperative game like a MMO, it would be just I want to be in a game where it has like there's like some blacksmiths who are really well known and they're like more skilled, or they're known on the server of having the best stuff. And I when I want to craft something, I need to like talk to 3 different people who with different sub professions that I need to source different ingredients. It just feels like a cohesive sort of market, like that's kind of
feels
what
real, yeah.
excites me.
Yeah.
Less kind of like every time when I go craft a thing, a window pops up with a little mini game. Like that to me doesn't excite me, but
Okay.
that's
It just depends on
for
what you're
me.
after. Like I think if I were to answer the game, what is the best crafting game? I would say Cooking Mama. But because I play the game for the joy of the execution of all those little mini games.
Because they're good
Yeah.
mini games. Yeah.
And you really feel. But what you were saying is really important, Chris, because when you can parallel the feel of real life, you have really like strong. You don't have to retrain the player, like it's just like a really strong tie-in. And so if you were to think about like if you wanted to have a table built for your house, right? You're not just gonna find any asshole. You're gonna go to Yelp, you're gonna read all the fucking reviews, you're gonna find the person who's been doing it the longest. And like what you're talking about with your blacksmith is the same thing. Like you want the person that's dumped a bunch of hours, that has the most flexibility, that can, guarantee some sort of output, even if there's a mini game or even if it's like, you have to give them more materials. But in the sense of like merging all of those things together, I think Valheim has a really good. It's probably the best in class for like crafting and cooperative community. But again, it's not an MMO. It's just more of like a MO.
It kind of
I guess
straddles the
fishing
line.
is a good example of where you can maybe build a little more gameplay. Or certainly, if you're going to get leatherworking, the combat system is important, or the discovery of hunting the different types of creatures and stuff you could build depth there. So there are
I see.
opportunities for sure.
Could
I
like
think,
front load the crafting mini game into the things that precede crafting, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
New World, by the way, also renowned, and it's early to say, but for its fishing mini game. Let's put that.
That's what I hear. Yeah, I need to look that
It's
up.
F3 to fish, by the way. You're presented with that fucking prompt like anytime you get within 10 yards of water. The game's like, by the way, it's F3 to fish. Not sure if you knew. It's F3 to fish. You're in like in the middle of a dungeon. F3 to fish. It's like
that's such a good meme opportunity.
We're making it a meme. Nightstuck, I wanted to ask if you have any like favorite crafting systems since you're already up here.
Not so much. I mean, for most of crafting in games, I only know WoW. And as I mentioned, the single-player RPGs. Where it's more likely, in some it's almost, you have to craft this item to progress the storyline. So that's also either accounted for in the design idea, or you have to, basically restart if you failed before. But in terms of WoW, there's this strange synergy at times. Maybe not so much anymore, where jewel crafting basically affected 80% of the entire economy just because you bought so much ore just to, what's it called in English? Prospect? Yeah. And then all the rejected material could go into crafting more stuff that doesn't get sold, just gets disenchanted. So enchanting itself is a weird profession where either you collect trash from the PvE content or you buy cheap stuff that got crafted under the value of your enchantment materials. So basically, it was really weird in late Cataclysm where jewel crafting was everything and nothing else really mattered. Maybe a couple of crafted armor from Dragon's Soul. So that it's not like that I like it, but it was really weird how much force you could affect on that small market.
Sure. People then probably ended up liking it just because it was economically powerful. But yeah.
One aspect with crafting that I'm seeing more now is kind of like where you kind of build automation for crafting. Like Terraria does this. Valheim even does it with like you just kind of build all these structures and put all this stuff in there and go get like the bees, right, or whatever. It's not really automation, but Factorio, right, is that. So I could see there's opportunities for that, I think, in the future. You just build structures that you just feed it the material and then over time it will spit it out. Could be fun. I don't know, it just came to my head.
I think we should probably wrap up soon. If anybody else has like favorite crafting experiences they want to talk about, feel free to page on up. Looks like Mao has
maybe
got
a last call.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about the automation games. Those are super satisfying. Those are like, but that's more of like the strategy element that I was talking about in single player games. Like, though there are the multiplayer ones that are really fun too, but like, it's more of like plotting out its efficiency. But yeah, those games are super like Factorio, very very fucking satisfying game. I wish that it looked better.
I think we tried to bring up Z Winter. I don't know if it's working, but we invited you.
He was in a war.
You gotta accept the little thing.
Yeah, he was in a war and messaged me if I wanted to page up our like resident New World grinder. Then he was Mao.
Hey,
welcome to stage.
Hey, so I had two thoughts from what you guys were talking about. The first one is, have you guys ever played Monster Hunter, like any of the Monster Hunter series?
Yes.
Because I feel like their crafting system does a really good job of like branching like the different ways that you can like progress in your crafting systems. I find that MMO crafting systems seem to be like pyramid shaped. Like there's like the one thing at the top that everybody's aiming for. Whereas with Monster Hunter, it's kind of like everyone's branching into different specializations as you progress in crafting. So yeah, I guess that's one thing I really appreciated about that game. And its crafting. I guess the other thought I had was I think there's something to say about the Infinity games. Sorry, I call them Infinity games. I mean like Cookie Clicker and like those merge three things together as you chase infinity. Because I think that has a lot of potential for like crafting mini games because it's such a repetitive activity, but people do it. Yeah.
Right. No, those are two very good points. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the dopamine hits though. That's the cookie clicker and stuff like that is just, it's like lizard brain stuff that just feels really good. They do the celebration in just the right way. The number goes up. You feel really good about it. And I guess that's an element of crafting that we didn't ever even really talk about. Like Chris kind of touched on it with, he liked cooking in Breath of the Wild because of the little celebration that like, it was like the jingle that it played was really pleasing, and like you wanted to do it because you liked it, you know. Well, you had to watch them rattle around in the bowl, and it was really wholesome.
I think that the feeling of actually crafting and the immersiveness of it is like what is in play in some of my favorite crafting. I mean, New World, for example, subtle things like when you walk up to any of the tables that are sort of being used, you can hear other people tinking around and whacking on things, and you see like 5 or 6 people gathered around the workshop. That does a lot to me to just make crafting somehow feel tangible and real, is to like actually see people having to use this station and a bunch of people interacting. Like it's a simple, creating the visuals, creating the sounds for it, that satisfaction adds a lot to making crafting feel good for me. I think that there actually is some of that dopamine that New World's crafting even leaves on the table. when you know, whether you craft one thing or craft 55 of a thing, you get the same kind of just like whack of a stinger
Yeah.
when the menu comes up and it tells you that you've made one, but the bar fills up and there's no sound on the bar filling up. Like for dopamine, the sounds of bars filling up are just like, if you want good bar filling up UI, go play Death Stranding. Every fucking level you finish, like 18 different bars fill up and they all sound incredible. Like all you want to do is finish missions. But
Yeah.
random other crafting thing I like that I just wanted to throw out there is I liked crafting in The Last of Us, which is like not very complex, but I liked it because it felt like there was a lot of choice there, especially if you played in a difficulty where there weren't a lot of materials. If you only had one bottle of alcohol, you had to choose, like, do I use it on health or a Molotov, for example? And just the sort of like having to open the backpack and watching him rifle around and the fact that you would like be vulnerable while you were doing that. And like it all just kind of felt like it was very harmonious with the whole rest of the world, like the scarcity of resources, the environment type, the having to make the choice, the watching the character rummage, the kind of like DIY MacGyvered nature of everything in the game, like to me made that crafting feel like sticky, even though it really was just you pick a recipe and hold the button on it, right? Like it wasn't mini game complex, but it did feel good.
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry. So
I mean, one thing you mentioned there that just I just thought of, just
Yeah.
a fleeting thought, is, you know, the workbench. I think the workbench is such an interesting thing in game design because every game has like kind of the workbench and you have to like go to the workbench. In WoW, it was like the forge. You have to be in proximity to the forge, right?
right.
Part of that is like verisimilitude. It's like, well, that's like, it makes sense because they're at the workbench. But there's also a whole other like thought on like why the workbench is important. This is like a whole other huge topic, but that's another aspect of crafting too that I always think is interesting, like in WoW, right, with the alchemy lab that you had to go into Stratholme or was it Skullmoss to use and things like that. That's a whole other immersion piece of crafting too.
Someone
Yeah, maybe Z Winter, I think you had some thoughts. You could have like the last thought here before you close out.
Go for it, yeah.
I mean, if we go about crafting, what I really like is mostly potions. Like, I feel that's something that a lot of game like RPG miss if they don't have potions. And like just that Witcher feeling that they also like have in UL, like you can oil your weapon to get advantage on certain enemies. Like that kind of basic stuff I like when it's not just like the whetstone in WoW, but like something more targeted.
That makes sense. Like lock and key systems where like you lock and key meaning like there's only like one use, right? You only have one key per lock. Sometimes you have multiple keys per lock, but like there's a lock and you need the key to open it. So like if you want to have a more damage on your weapon, then you need the whetstone. But what you like are the ones that do even more than just like a small bonus, but it's like a consumable item that you can work towards that, you know, changes the way that your gameplay works, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like being able to track like many stuff, not just like have one answer for everything.
Totally.
And yeah, potions is a classic. Crafting potions should be like in every game almost. So
Yeah, I would say overall on this topic, though, and just reading some of the comments in live chatting, I do feel like there's still a ton of room in this space. Like, I don't think that we've really seen the one crafting system everybody is going to copy yet that is kind of like the model going forward. I think there's still a lot of room for innovation here, and a lot of crafting systems are not as imaginative as they could be. They must be incredibly hard to design, like you were saying, because you're not going to feel good crafting potions no matter how many flourishes there are, what kind of a mini game there is or whatever, if the game balance is such that you never need to use health potions, because you're going to feel like I'm building a worthless item, right? It's all really tied together. Okay. Well, it's 7:15. I think we're going to wrap this up. Thanks everybody for coming up and hanging out. We got like a big old family party up here on stage. We will be back same time next week. And until then, let's just take it over to the text channels. We'll catch you then. Until we're back, Chris.
all right, later gamers.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.